start streaming. And, well, there's a lot of people here already. Holy shit. Alright. Alright, so we should be streaming on the YouTube. That's great. Let me just do one thing here real quick. Oh, come on. Oh, hey, Mark. Can everybody hear me? Please raise your hand if you can, or say something. Please speak now or forever hold your peace.
Yep, you're good.
Fantastic. So I'm going to try to get an image on to the stream that's on YouTube that just sort of shows the nuclear fuel cycle from the presentation of Cameco and how I think this is somewhat in line with their strategic goals, particularly in closing a gap in the light water cycle. I'm not sure how much fuel manufacturing that they do for non-CANDU reactors. Mark may be able to speak to that. But yeah, I have some other. I've done some quick back of the napkin math here in terms of what is the cost of this deal, what Cameco is raising, how much they are going to have to raise in addition to this. So yeah, with all that, let's get started. So, big news, everyone. Cameco is buying 49% of Westinghouse. This is, I guess, a deal with Brookfield Renewables. Brookfield bought Westinghouse from Toshiba a couple years ago. Basically, what was left of it anyway. And now you have this. So this was a little bit out of left field. I didn't see this coming. So yeah, a day of surprises. I guess the Bank of England decides to torpedo the markets, and then we get this fun bit from Cameco. So, Mark, what are your initial impressions? You're here for the first time. I'd love to hear what you have to say about this.
Hey, Chapman. Yeah, I just jumped on a complete whim. I obviously have seen you in tweet form, but this is the first time I've been on any of your spaces. Yeah, I am as blindsided as probably anyone. I love the mining that Cameco does. I was lucky enough to go visit their mines this summer in Saskatchewan, and I know the leadership pretty well, and they are, let's just say, they are absolutely committed to an extremely long and prosperous future for nuclear energy. We've watched as they've slowly built up what you might call true vertical integration from the standpoint of like GLE and Silex. So that's laser enrichment for anybody listening. I don't know the audience super well, but I would assume that many of you know that there is a new enrichment technology that has great promise but has never been commercialized, and it is held not quite majority by Cameco, but they own the right to take nearly complete control of laser enrichment technology that was invented in Australia and brought to the US with Silex Corporation. So we already knew that Cameco was very serious about using its hard-won solid base in the ground in the mines of Saskatchewan to enter new areas of the world nuclear industry. This is obviously a radically big increase in that attempt to do everything in nuclear. And I might say that it's a little bit scary sounding, but just my experience is if there was a team that could really pull this off well, and you ask me who do you know in the world of nuclear who's best at what they do, I would point to Cameco, and I think that this could be an exciting time.
Yeah, I have to agree. I This makes sense in the context of Silex because if you're looking at Silex and they're getting into enrichment, a lot of that um, a lot of that enrichment services is going to go to existing light water reactors. Yes, Mark, I've known you've talked about Silex as the killer app for SMRs, and I was just at the G4 SR4 conference, and I was listening to all of these SMR vendors talk about different enrichment levels that they're all going to, and I'm like, yep, you're gonna have, this is exactly what Mark was talking about, where you're just gonna have these somebody's at 13, somebody's at 18, somebody's at 20, and you're gonna need a production system that can do those boutique level fuel batches that doesn't have to completely change their operating assay or tails assay. However they do this I have a 50% knowledge of how they do this with the centrifuges, but essentially you kind of have to like stick to something in the centrifuge technology, in the centrifuge realm. You just can't do these batches essentially. Somebody goes to them and it says, "Hey, I want 13% enrichment," and they're going to say, "Well, that's going to cost a lot of money." But if you are looking at this in the context of light water services, the fuel manufacturing that they are getting from Westinghouse, which is going to be cash flow for Cameco, which is great. So this isn't some asset that they're buying that's just going to sit on their books and everyone's going to wonder how they monetize it. They are going to, at the very least, going to get cash flow from this. The second part of this that I think is actually good is the fact that Cameco is getting 49%, which means that they're going to do equity method accounting. So they're not going to have to put all of that Westinghouse debt on their books. It's been a while since I've done anything in terms of like consolidations and how you account for investments in the whole CPA world. So the rules in that may have changed, but basically they get to report the Westinghouse profits on their books, their share of it, which will be 49%. This will look good to Cameco, and they will carry that investment value on their books, which in this case is, as I'm reaching over for some notes here, approximately $2.2 billion. This 650 million that that everyone reacted quite negatively to, because they're basically giving a huge discount to Goldman Sachs here and whoever else was on that transaction at 21.95 a share, which has, as we have seen after hours, basically sent the shares tumbling. So that's fun, but they're going to have to raise another 1.55 to 1.45 billion to complete their portion of this transaction. And if you have, as reported, the enterprise value is 7.87 billion. With the 4.5 equity, or basically, essentially, your market cap part of that equation there, you get whatever debt minus cash is, it equals to 3.38 billion. So it's not horrible. I mean, you ideally would like it if you never acquired anything with debt, but the world isn't that simple, I guess. But I think the very crucial and very key thing here is that this is going to be cash flow positive to Cameco. They're going to see cash flow from this. Westinghouse, I don't know off the top of my head what their the fuel fabrication business, what is their market share, but fuel fabrication makes a lot of money. It's very, very profitable. So that's the good news, I guess. And I think it's beyond that, I think what Cameco really wanted here was the fuel fabrication. The boon for them is in the future.
Chapman.
Mark, go ahead.
Sorry, I was
please.
going to say.
Yeah, please.
So Cameco makes fuel for CANDUs. They
Exactly.
make unenriched fuel pellets, and they were clearly looking to move into bigger markets by, again, vertically integrating up the value chain from the black gold under the Canadian shield, shall we say. in terms of, one of the things people say about nuclear is that you use barely any uranium. Well, great for the world, great for nature, great for people, and great for price stability for nuclear power, but it means there's only a certain amount of revenue available in digging up uranium, shall we say. So it's fascinating to see Cameco marching up the value chain. I'm not necessarily including building reactors in that. Building reactors has been cursed. Do you mind if I very quickly walk through
Please go ahead.
the last 23 years of the
Oh
insane
yeah,
history
yeah,
of Westinghouse ownership?
yeah. Please.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Everyone here would love to hear that. I would too.
Right. So Westinghouse was founded by George Westinghouse to market his invention of air brakes for elevators. That was a way to stop people from dying in the first age of skyscrapers and elevators. So Westinghouse then effectively won the War of the Currents. The alternating current was the Westinghouse system. Westinghouse found and retained Tesla as a talent to help do triphase current. Triphase current was alternating current was so weird and so difficult that it practically formalized engineering education in the US and other countries because you needed so much instruction time, mathematics, etc., in order to understand how to work with electricity. Westinghouse, kind of interesting, my grandfather's first job after he came back from being a young soldier occupying Japan in 1946, 1947. He was an electrical engineering grad from Oklahoma State. His first job was actually with Westinghouse Electric Corporation in Pittsburgh. So I have a tiny little family connection there. Well, eventually Westinghouse got into nuclear. They got the contract to develop the nuclear submarine reactor that became the PWR. They became one of the world's most successful builders of, well, not builders, designers and manufacturers of nuclear plant equipment. Crucially for our story, Westinghouse never built a nuclear plant. They were not the architect engineers of nuclear plants. They made the internals, they sold the internals. That was the way they made their money, along with making the fuels, the pressurized water reactor fuels. Now, Westinghouse also got into some other businesses during those weird times in the 70s and 80s. One of the businesses became CBS. Well, that actually became bigger, more profitable than the original Westinghouse during the you might call it the electricity downturn, the end of the great age of growing nuclear plants. And so Westinghouse, the company we know as the nuclear company, rents its name. They licensed the name in the Westinghouse logo, the famous Paul Rand Westinghouse logo. They rent that from the media company that was the original mother company. I think that is extremely embarrassing, and one of the things that I would do, I would waste money obtaining that forever, permanently, if it were available, because that just pisses me off on a I don't know, an aesthetic level. So Westinghouse then bounced around lots of different hands. One thing that I think is interesting is that there's a history of Westinghouse acquiring, absorbing subsidiaries, new subsidiaries, and then destroying the value there. So here's one example that's in my head. Westinghouse bid against Combustion Engineering for this momentous contract with the Koreans to build their nuclear fleet. Westinghouse thought that they were in a good position to win because they were the biggest and best nuclear company in the world. They had already built an entire nuclear plant for the Koreans and had a long experience working with them. In the end, Koreans went with Combustion Engineering because Combustion Engineering, one of the big four of nuclear builders in the US, had taken them much more seriously on technology transfer. This sets up a pattern that we'll hear about a little bit more of Westinghouse being a little too big for their britches, a little bit too haughty, a little bit too pompous, and not taking customers super seriously. In this case, Combustion Engineering sold their IP and their know-how and their design to the Koreans. That the rest is history. They went off and became one of the most incredibly successful nuclear companies and eventually beat out Westinghouse for huge era-making contracts like the UAE project that is now coming to completion in Abu Dhabi. Right, but Westinghouse, meanwhile, bought Combustion Engineering, or the scraps, I guess, and then did not continue that reactor system, even though that reactor system was the one that was actively being built and completed in Arizona and in Korea. So why all this? Because then combustion engineering was sort of dissolved. That team fell apart. That design stopped being built by Westinghouse, and then Westinghouse itself got sold off. First to British Nuclear Fuels Limited. This was a time when the UK was the first company or the first country to liberalize its electricity sector. They sort of denationalized. They sold off their nuclear plants and their fuels company. Their fuels company was cash rich and wanted to diversify. British Nuclear Fuels Limited bought Westinghouse. I think, if I remember correctly, for about $1 billion. Then, only a few years later, they they sold Westinghouse for a big profit, something like $5 billion. They sold it to who was it? They sold it to Toshiba, right?
Yeah,
So Westinghouse,
Toshiba. That's right.
right? Westinghouse goes to Toshiba. Toshiba pays what, $5 billion or something, way above any other bid. I think the other high bids were something like $3 billion, Mitsubishi or something. So then Westinghouse just keeps getting handed around, shall we say. Toshiba then, as everyone here probably knows, went bankrupt trying to build Westinghouse's disastrous AP1000 projects. Part of the disaster there is that Westinghouse had subcontractors that could not deliver on building a nuclear plant. Then Westinghouse was left in the position of building a nuclear plant, having never built a nuclear plant, and they were completely terrible at it. I have a whole podcast, an hour-long podcast about this misadventure with Chris Kiefer over at Decouple. So Westinghouse did a lot of bad work when they were put in charge of building a nuclear plant, which they'd never done before. It's now currently being undone and corrected. That's what the current delay is over at Vogtle in Georgia, the two AP1000s. Right. So then Westinghouse gets brought out of bankruptcy by, Brookfield, the Canadian firm, and one of the first things they make sure is that Westinghouse is not going to get distracted building any more nuclear plants. So in some ways, there's been a very disciplined focus on just making money selling PWR fuels. What was the problem? The problem is that nuclear went through this huge downturn coinciding with ultra cheap natural gas and increasingly cheap renewables from the massive subsidies that were being poured into them. This is during a time when much of the rich world was liberalizing electricity markets, which was just ruining a lot of nuclear plants who were suddenly competing directly against gas plus subsidized renewables. So you had a Westinghouse with this awful project that they'd mismanaged over at Georgia, almost no reactor orders, very few prospects, and that's the Westinghouse that we're seeing bought today in an environment that is clearly becoming extremely positive for nuclear around the world. So there's the adventure, ups and downs, a lot of mismanagement, a lot of potential. We will see if Cameco, which had the ability to survive as a uranium miner during the worst time ever for uranium mining, whether they have what it takes to fulfill the potential that Westinghouse clearly has.
That is probably the greatest synopsis that you could have for the journey of Westinghouse. I've listened to it before, and it's still just as good. I'm putting a link up in the space to the Decouple podcast. That's just a great thing for everybody to listen to. I listen to that in my spare time when I'm just out mowing the lawn or whatever else. It's a great great informative podcast. Mark is on there all the time. How many times have you been on Decouple now, Mark? I think it's like what? I don't know. I've lost count.
A lot.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I still haven't done my uranium mining episode, and I haven't done my modeling episode, haven't done the wind episode. Chris Kiefer's on my ass all the time to come back, so you'll see me more.
Hey, Mark, Nelson, how you doing? What's up, Chapman? What's going on, guys?
Howdy.
I think wanted to add on something regarding Westinghouse. I think Biocom's owns some shares of that. That's like an Asian company. If you guys can Google that, I read it somewhere, so I'm not sure if that's accurate, but I think they own a portion as shareholders, an Asian company through Biocom.
Well, is this the Westinghouse TV portion that got spun off? Because it's through Viacom, then that's, I think, is that different? Wouldn't that be? I don't know.
They were that's the side that owns the Westinghouse. That's the I guess the legal entity that's the successor to the original Westinghouse air brake, you might say. It's just yeah, it's weird. That's the company. Viacom is not. Viacom just lasted until 2006. What did they become? Anyway, they're the group that would own and license out the Westinghouse name and logo that Westinghouse then uses on the Westinghouse Electric Company, the nuclear manufacturer, uses on its reactors.
Yeah, it's sort of like
So,
what like
okay.
GE is no longer like GE appliances are no longer GE appliances. They're just it's now a logo essentially. I think that's the way that works
Well, and
now.
GE just announced a few days ago what their nuclear holding company is going to be called. It's got a really well. I've got friends at GE, and I love their advanced reactor offering, but I think that Vernova is hard to say and pretty dumb.
Yeah, I was sort of wondering how they came up with that one too when I heard it, but yeah, it's
I think it was supposed to be as meaningless and as unlovable as possible.
yeah something definitely determined by a committee. Let's just put it that way. I think that's probably the best way to put it.
Chapman, the opposite logic of the French going with Framatome, where they reverted to the name that they used during the biggest glories of their nuclear build out.
I got to speak to some people from Framatome when I was at up in Toronto. Um, it's very interesting. Like some of the there was this guy from Framatome from Germany, and he was just very negative on nuclear in Germany. Like he just didn't think it was coming back. And then it was like speaking to the people from EDF, like they just had an entirely different attitude. It was like, yes, we do nuclear, and it's just sort of like there's no, it's there isn't I don't know, not the feeling of like having to build something back, I guess. Um, it was interesting. I don't know. That's kind of a sidebar, but anyway. So, does anybody have any questions for myself, for Mark, while he's here? Um, I guess we can turn it over to the floor. What people think. So, if anybody has a question, please request to speak. Come on up. Don't be shy.
Yeah, what does the reactor space look like in terms of market share? Like, what kind of market share does Westinghouse have currently?
In terms of the reactors they've built, or the ones they're currently fueling, or what's expected.
Um, I guess what exists today, maybe, and what's expected. I mean, answers on that would be awesome.
Yeah, so I have sort of a big spreadsheet I built with all the world's historical and current nuclear plants. So I'm going to spend 60 seconds here pulling it up so I can get you exact answers. So I'll be right back.
Mark, while you're doing that, I just wanted to jump in and say Vernova um, looks to me like it's a Spanish amalgamation between Verne, which means green, and Nova, which means new. So it roughly translates to like new green or green new.
In case anybody's curious, Silex is down on the ASX. That was apparently has there been a times change in Australia? Because now the ASX is opening at like 7, which is fantastic. But they also close at 1, which is great because it's not keeping me up all night. I don't know. Have they switched to summertime down there or something like that? Patrick, you can come up and tell us.
Chapman, are you opening and closing two separate markets on two different like sides of the world? You need to sleep, dude.
Yeah, I know. And it's just like this is why. Okay, so while Mark is pulling that up, yeah, I since I don't know what to do, I sort of missed the some of the energy trains in Australia. Um, yeah, that was what I did today. Oh, Mark, are you back? You sounded like you're
Yes.
okay.
So of the plants that I have around the world as directly being supplied by Westinghouse, rather than just those derived by Westinghouse. We'll get into that. I've got 70 plants currently operational or under construction. So 68 operational, 2 under construction. As we've seen with Westinghouse taking over more and more of the Ukrainian PWR fuel market as requested by Ukraine to diversify supplies away from Russia and then finally to completely replace supplies from Russia, Westinghouse is positioned to fuel reactors that they didn't build. They definitely specialize in pressurized water reactor fuels. That is the type of reactor that they invented, even if you could arguably say that other countries made better versions of the PWRs after Westinghouse stopped building much because America stopped building and then America's kind of stopped exporting. So for example, Russian PWRs have required almost none of the major component replacements that Westinghouse PWRs have required. Let me expand on that. Russian pressurized water reactors, which they call VVER or VVER, have not required steam generator replacements or reactor pressure vessel head replacements, but Westinghouse and combustion engineering PWRs have required those replacement parts. So other countries coming after us copied and improved upon PWRs. The Germans have also improved on PWRs, and theirs are arguably higher quality, cheaper to operate, and maybe if we can stop them from shutting them down, we're going to be even longer lasting than Westinghouse PWRs, but that's the trouble with going first. Right, so of these 70 operational or under construction Westinghouse branded PWRs around the world, we have the countries USA represented, that's the vast majority of them, South Korea, Sweden, Switzerland, Slovenia, Spain, Taiwan, and a few in China, and those are the countries that have built Westinghouse branded reactors. At least one country has a Westinghouse branded reactor that was built, never turned on, but we may see it turn on this decade. That's the Philippines. And then I believe they also, I'm not sure why I don't have it labeled as Westinghouse in here, but they have built a reactor for Brazil, or designed and sold a reactor to Brazil that was built by somebody else. So that would bring it up to 71, but it also means I may need to go through and check some of the historical reactors, whether they were built by a consortium that included Westinghouse as a leader, and I just didn't have it listed as them alone.
Is Westinghouse doing, are they offering accident-tolerant fuels? Do you know?
Yes,
Okay.
they are. So most accident-tolerant fuels are not going to be very compelling for operators unless they're forced to use them by regulators or by the weird EU green taxonomy rules that were written to require various things that sound good as buzzwords but don't really matter or are not beneficial for nuclear as a business or for the safety case or for the environment. So EU green taxonomy is a set of rules that were just put into place that enshrined nuclear as green if it met a bunch of annoying requirements. Some of those requirements include having a final disposal site already selected and under development by a certain year. Another one is to use accident-tolerant fuels. Accident-tolerant fuels includes a number of technologies, including advanced coatings for the cladding of fuel rods. It also includes dopants or dopants, doped fuel. So in this case, chromium-based materials in tiny little pellets put inside of the crystalline structure of the uranium ceramic fuel in order to slightly change the properties of the fuel to make it act better in accidents. These are extremely marginal gains. These are very marginal gains, but there was a lot of government money to develop them. There is not a super compelling business case for these fuels, even in terms of safety, until they start getting into some crazy stuff like uranium silicide or uranium nitride fuels. These include such a big bump up in density that it might be possible to make an easier case for 2-year or longer fueling cycles if the density of the fuel pellet can be bumped up sufficiently. It would involve lots of other technical challenges being solved, but those are some of the things involved in accident-tolerant fuel. The folks over at Clean Core Thorium Energy are working on what will be an ATF for CANDU reactors that will hopefully give a big enough boost to performance that it will make the increase in safety worth it to the operator rather than just being a pain in the ass that gets taken back by a regulator that then becomes more conservative. So Westinghouse is working on ATF technologies, and they include these claddings and doped fuel. And then later, a much later stage will be to work on the high density fuels with uranium silicide. I believe it's uranium silicide or nitride. I'll have to check.
Yeah, you touched on the longer fuel cycles, which is what my understanding has been, the carrot part of this accident tolerant fuel stick. And I think that's the only way they've got to solve that in order to make them, as you say, what was it? What the operator would want to do without, forced to having done so through regulators will not force them. There you go. They'll use it by choice, essentially.
Right. So it's kind of interesting, but not like super compelling in the near term for most operators. And then some crazier stuff in the long horizon would be like metal fuels. So, for example, what Lightbridge is working on. But yeah, we'll see if Westinghouse I mean, there's been, I think, several $100 million in funding at different times for these ATFs between USA and a few other countries. That's why they've been developed. But the economic edge for operators is so low that, except if required, they're just not that likely to want to do all the crazy paperwork changes and operational changes that would introduce these technologies. We'll see, though. I can be disproven if they actually put it to work, but I doubt it at this point.
Yeah, I get that. Because that was what my understanding of it was, anyway. As I tried to go and did a deep dive on these whole accident tolerant fuels a couple weeks ago. There we go. Anybody else? What questions do we have?
Can I ask a question?
Well, yes, of course you can.
Thank you. Hey, Mark, thanks for taking my question. The question would be, broadly, I'm interested in Cameco's vertical integration to serve nuclear utilities in this country. It was said that historically, U.S. utilities have preferred to work with Tenex because they just provide fuel all along the fuel cycle, and so it's easy kind of one-stop shopping. So broadly, I'm interested in Cameco's vertical integration and how this transaction today plays into that, because I'm looking for somehow Cameco to become the Tenex of the West. Specifically, I'm curious. You've previously said that, along the lines of Cameco vertically integrating would be if they were to acquire the enrichment phase of the fuel cycle, which they don't have. And so you had previously said that.
That's what laser enrichment is for.
Right. And so I'm wondering if today, because there is a connection between laser enrichment, the GLE come Westinghouse in North Carolina. And so I'm wondering broadly about Cameco's vertical, particularly about if today's transaction helps Cameco vertically integrate that piece in enrichment, because there's something going on in North Carolina with Westinghouse and GLE.
So Westinghouse was not involved in GLE. GLE is still located on the campus of General Electric's nuclear energy operations, because it was General Electric that had been the host for that technology, and the partner in that company was Silex for a long time. General Electric went out. They went out. And why did they sell to Cameco? Why did they get out? Well, this is an interesting thing. I've heard from people that said, oh, I'm sure General Electric, if they could have made it work, they would have, and they didn't think it would pay off, so they wanted to get out. Or they just didn't have the stomach for the battle. What battle? This is one of the most sensitive nuclear technologies in the whole world. It's weirdly, I think, the only top secret technology that emerged from private like genuinely private ownership and still privately owned IP in the US, there's a principle that states that privately developed IP is not classifiable or cannot be classified. Well, in the case of Silex, the US government made an exception, signed an agreement with Australia to bring in the technology as long as it wasn't used in ways that Australia didn't want it to be. Something like that. You all can go look it up. It's matters of public record. So GLE was handed off in a way from General Electric to Cameco several years ago. Loud in the industry, I suppose, and quiet corners of a quiet industry, but I'm not sure how much the world was paying attention until very recently. Suddenly, it looks like an absolute genius move, not just from the perspective of advanced nuclear, but from Russia breaking the world in two. So if you're looking for vision from Cameco, the fact that they just happened to be right there when Russia split the world apart, the enriching world apart, with either with control or the right to control potentially the most efficient and flexible enrichment technology that's ever developed in world history, that would be my sign that I would look for from the outside as to whether Cameco is going to be a good steward of Westinghouse. That feels very good to me. Westinghouse was not involved with that, though. That was not their thing at all. So in terms of vertically integrating, I started this but didn't quite break it down. Let's just use a toy example here of nuclear power plants that cost $30 a megawatt hour to operate, right? So what's a nuclear plant where that's about the cost? Well, Diablo Canyon is approximately $30 a megawatt hour if you look at a good year of production divided by the cost of that year and that year's share of long-term capital operation. The fuel cost is going to be under $10 a megawatt hour. This is a very opaque, a famously opaque market for fuels. It's difficult to figure out how much people are actually spending unless you're on the inside, in which case you're not really incentivized to leak that. The uranium content, like the product that normally would be the end of the value chain for Cameco for enriched PWR fuel, would be just the enriched, not even the enriched, but the raw uranium U3O8 headed to somebody else's enrichment facility. That would make up something like $1 or $2 a megawatt hour of the value of that fuel, maybe less, depending on the market conditions and the price of other services. So they are now moving to a point where the value of the products they're going to be able to provide into reactors is going up not by a factor of like 2, but by many multiples. Not 10, maybe let's just say 5. These are very rough numbers. They're things I don't typically focus on when I'm running around saving nuclear plants. I'm sure, dive back in and get these numbers under my belt for the next time we have news coming out about this purchase. But yeah, so that's what we're seeing from Cameco. A note on 10X. You made a very interesting statement. So TENEX is what is it? Texnab Export. It's the subsidiary of Rosatom, the Russian state nuclear company that deals with the fuel cycle, the uranium, the enrichment, the fuel manufacture. Cameco has had a really rough go of it, even in what you might call their home North American market, of showing up to sell to utilities and utilities saying, well, I've got a special little offer from the Russians right here. How about you lower your prices some? There was absolutely brutal price competition with extremely cheap Russian product being sold at prices that Cameco was unwise to match for a number of years. The Russians, it's not that the Russians weren't making money, it's just they had very different incentives, different cost structure. Their salespeople had different missions. Their job was to get sales in America and do what it takes to get some of that market. Actually making money on each deal was less important to Russian salespeople in America, right? So when you said become 10x to the world, I had to chuckle a little bit because of that fairly traumatizing decade that Cameco just had post-Fukushima Daiichi, trying desperately to get contracts signed with utilities that made sense from the perspective of actually mining uranium. And then of course, the flood of cheap material from Kazakhstan made it even worse. Even though Cameco hedged a little bit by taking ownership stakes, partial ownership stakes in Kazakhstan's uranium mines. Right. where am I going with all of this? I think it's beautiful aesthetically that Cameco is moving from something that's hard, that they're good at, that involves an extremely long time horizon, this uranium mining, and they're moving into the higher value chain, the higher steps of the value chain of nuclear. Oh, sorry, one more thing I should mention. I do not hold Cameco stock, partly because I'm a little bit too close to the metal on a lot of this stuff, partly because I'm not trying to be any kind of active investor in nuclear. I put every bit of my heart and soul into nuclear. I put my career into it. That's close enough for me. Maybe at some point I'll get into uranium, wild and uranium investing, but that's just my job here is not to help you make money on uranium investing, and it's not to do it myself. My job is to save nuclear plants and get new ones built. And if you guys are betting on that being good for uranium and good for your investment portfolios, well, I guess I'm your friend. If you're thinking that me getting more nuclear in the world is bad for uranium or something that makes you need to short it, well, you go do that. I'm not an investment advisor. Don't pretend to be. I'm here to save nuclear plants, understand how to get them built, and yeah, make the world better that way.
Well, as such, you are also an invaluable asset because you're not going to talk your book, which is fantastic for investors. So that's a good thing, actually. Seriously, I think someone like you is always welcome at a nuclear investor space. I mean that seriously. So I will, however, say that I did buy Cameco because I had a price target at 2250, and that order was filled. Um, so, hey, folks, I have said some people have known that I am fairly outspoken for the fact that I told everybody to sell when everybody was saying to buy. And, sometimes you get that call right, and it looks like I have. That said, I have buy targets, and I stick to those buy targets because if I don't stick to the damn buy targets, I'm never going to buy anything, in a down market. And I think you just have to go with that. So we'll see where it goes. Like I said, I think this is a good price for Cameco. There's still things out there from the investment side of things, like they still have to raise more money for this. Now they have a lot of money. They have quite a bit of cash on their books. They've got credit facilities. They've got a fairly substantial refund from the Canadian Revenue Agency. I think the Canadian Revenue Agency is stretching that one out as long as they can, while the Canadian dollar is being devalued. That's a joke, by the way. But they're going to get that money eventually, either through tax refunds or something else like that. But either way, it is Cameco's rightfully, and the courts have said it is. So, yeah, I think it's. I think this is honestly. The more that I think about this, the more that I like this deal. I think it does close a pretty critical gap for them. It also, ensures, like, anyone who's saying that Cameco is a bad investment, I'm sorry. I think they're just wrong. Cameco now has, once you have enrichment, Cameco will be vertically integrated. They're not going to be quite as vulnerable to those. Hey, we're getting a discount from the Russians, even if we have an unbifurcated world. You're going to have Cameco that's able to really fully leverage the supply chain and the vertically integrated fuel cycle. And I think this is good for Cameco. I mean, not only that, they're also getting all the patents and the potential design improvements, let's say, to the AP1000. Hopefully that happens. But yeah. So, Patrick, you got your hand up. What's up?
Yeah, so this is a question that might be relevant to a few people who are listening in. So I know very little about Westinghouse, or this particular arm of Westinghouse that CCG are buying or merging with, whatever. But so is this arm, is this an operating division that actually makes money? And if they do sort of have revenue, are they profitable, or is this the idea CCJ want to somehow turn an unprofitable business into something that will be profitable under their guidance and management or something? Or can you give me some color around that?
Mark, do you want to handle that, or go ahead, please?
Sure. Here's a question. Did Westinghouse and the Western nuclear world learn its lesson in Georgia? And what was that lesson? Was the lesson never build nuclear reactors again? In which case, the major thing that bankrupted Westinghouse and Toshiba the first time, I guess maybe that won't happen. Now, I can tell you that Cameco leadership sees nuclear as something that's going to be around forever and it's going to grow. I don't think that they have any illusions about how hard that is. Pretty much the entire Cameco leadership team has been there through the worst things that you'll ever really see in the nuclear industry, which is a nuclear accident-fueled downturn exacerbated by potentially one-time perfect storm of other secular events, right? So the Cameco leadership team has seen the very worst and most horrible things you can see in the nuclear industry, and they're the ones who survived. That's what I would say about them. It doesn't mean they're going to make Westinghouse successful at doing things that it was unsuccessful before. Doesn't mean they're going to make this a slam dunk and make every current Cameco investor rich forever. I'm just saying they're a leadership team that has seen the very worst and has survived it, right? If Westinghouse has learned its lessons on what not to do in reactor construction, and it can move forward and do that cursed part of nuclear well, then I don't know, all the better. Maybe we have a new nuclear age dawning that'll come in the West through Westinghouse. It may be that the lead on nuclear construction is just going to stay with other Western and non-Western firms, and that Westinghouse will just continue to be a repository of some of the most ancient and treasured IP in nuclear, excellent PWR fuel, and a way to get maximum value out of the uranium that Cameco knows very well how to mine from its mines around the world.
Okay, so they have revenue though.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. The fuel cycle. I'm looking on WNA here. Fuel fabrication accounts for probably about, let's just say, 1/5 of the cost of the fuel. Yeah. So yes, and Cameco now potentially has eyes to that revenue. Like, it doesn't matter if it's mined by Boss, doesn't matter if it's mined by BHP at Olympic Dam, doesn't matter if it's mined by 4 Mile, Cameco is going to get a slice. That's enormously, I think, very, as we say, bullish for Cameco. And I think it's, what Cameco has, they have a mission here, and that is vertical integration, and they are executing on that. So you have to give them, they may be overpaying for the assets. Who knows? We will find out. They may not be quite executing on everything, but they have a vision, and that is to be more than just a uranium miner. Now, granted, they've had that for some time. Of course, they've had Port Hope conversion. They've had the fuel fabrication facility for CANDU, of course, but at the same time, they have aspirations to go beyond that. And that's going to give them eyes to cash flow across the fuel cycle, which is going to give them more money and more ability to, potentially acquire future tier 1 assets in the Athabasca region, in the basin. So I think it's good for them. I think it's good for nuclear as a whole, actually. I think this is a good place for Westinghouse to be. It's no longer, and Mark, maybe I think you echoed a little bit of that, of feeling that this is actually a good place for a nuclear company to be in, with an enterprise that basically, their business is nuclear as well. So maybe there will be a bit more, hopefully better stewardship and understanding of that, and trying to actually make something of it. But
I don't know whether this stuff matters, and maybe this is a sort of irrelevant navel gazing that you could only do if, like me, you don't own their stock and don't plan to, for reasons that have nothing to do with whether they're a good investment. I'm too close to the ship, I suppose. But The Cameco leadership, like me, comes from the flyover parts of their country. So Saskatchewan's almost due north. I think it's nearly due north of me, where I come from in Oklahoma. They are prairie people. They are very focused on survival over long periods of time because of the horror, the drama of surviving Fukushima Daiichi. What that meant was the leadership team in place now had to go around and fire close friends and family in a very small part of the world. And it was a horrifying experience. I've heard them talk about it. In some ways, I think they think about it all the time. If they're doing something that perhaps look exuberant, that fascinates me because they are very conservative in many ways. As business people, it's the conservative part of Canada. I think that they see the mistakes at Westinghouse as clearing up a lot of misconceptions about what Westinghouse is actually capable of doing, and that they are going to be getting Westinghouse for what they know it can do well, and for how well that can integrate with what Cameco already does, as well as anybody in the business, which is mine and market uranium.
Patrick, you got your mic on. Are you still saying something or?
Sorry, no, done.
No, it's fine. Well, this has been a very interesting day. And the week is only getting started, folks. It's Tuesday. I mean, jeez.
So Chapman, the proven reserves post that I want is you breaking down how to value this thing, because that's like the most interesting question. Like,
I can probably do that, at least on a revenue scale. Make a sort of a guess here, as to how much cash flow they might be seeing from this. I think it depends. I have to. I'm now going to have to go in and figure out what actual cost is on fuel fabrication. I mean, I think I have an idea on the revenue, but determining final cost is going to be fun. Because none of these things are publicly traded.
Maybe I'm on this one. I almost think that revenue is not the only situation. Like, look at this. The way I look at it is like Cameco, and again, it's not going to be easy to execute on this because they're talking about just like building a very complex business, assuming that they're going to go the full enrichment route, right? It's like I almost think that they're trying to build the Exxon Mobil or just like the BP of uranium, for example, fully integrated up and down the line. So Exxon's margins are much higher than your typical just oil companies out there throughout downturns, just because there's just less mouths to feed in there between refining margins and just some gas stations and whatnot, and actually having the oil part as well. It's a very complex business, but their margins at all parts of the fuel cycle are larger than their like individual pure play competitors. But of course, they execute very, very well. So that's the part I'm just really curious about. It's like, how do we think that just like the margins of all of these different business segments theoretically get better if they can execute on this vision? That seems to be what they're doing, but of course, things that work in a spreadsheet in the real world are different. But I kind of think about what they want to be in 5 years is ExxonMobil of uranium.
Well, I'll say this. I kind of like that framing of the vision. I think it's fair. And I think that there's going to be a lot of gains that just comes from pure industrial coordination. Each part of the fuel cycle knowing exactly what the other parts are doing because it's all one company. I don't think it's in as much in terms of like, well, we'll see if it's exercising market power. I think that then that would be difficult in our business culture and our regulatory culture that looks a little bit down on market power and monopolies. But I think what's important here is that wasted effort and duplicated efforts and uncertainties that aren't important for the utility, like the intermediate stages of manufacturing and conversion and enrichment, all sorts of stuff like that. I think that those having much tighter coordination will allow fuel to be offered at the same or maybe even slightly lower price that has more value for the company controlling it. So I definitely see that. But this is a very unrigorous answer, and I think that this has been a surprising day, and we're going to do a lot more research on this in the next few weeks.
Yeah, I'm going to be doing some research on this too, because this now, like this brings fuel fabrication to the forefront for me. Whereas previously I was focusing primarily on enrichment, so that's fun. Um, yeah, I think again it does. Cameco having basically a piece of every action in that vertically integrated ladder is, I think, good for them. I mean, that will be something. Look, they have the lowest cost of production, and they have the finest tier one assets in the OECD. You know, and now they're getting a fairly good fuel fabrication business, and they have eyes to next generation enrichment. The next step that they need is getting Westinghouse working on some new reactor design that can be, as you've all heard me say, put in a fucking factory and just build it on a damn assembly line. Hopefully they'll do that next, but that's what I gotta say there. So, chaos is a ladder. You came up. What's up?
Thanks for hosting the space, and sorry if I'm asking something that was answered before I arrived. But I was curious to know if you have any opinions on whether or not this is likely to be the catalyst for more transactions, or if these things are so unique in their characteristics that it's not likely to have any impact that way.
Oh boy. Um, Anybody else have any thoughts about that before I talk about it? Out of curiosity. No? Okay, great. In terms of transactions, are you meaning like transactions on more contracting, let's say?
Well, sorry, I meant more companies opportunistically looking to grab assets, maybe buy divisions of other companies or combinations that are similar in nature to this.
I mean, who else would you buy? Sheesh. I mean, GE's got their own nuclear business. I don't think Framatome and Orano is up for sale. Uh, I mean, look, it is lovemaking season in the wider markets. We're coming to that point. Just not within just the nuclear space. That's just the market in general. Um, because there is going to be, even unfortunately, even more consolidation. That is just coming down the line. Um, as far as consolidations within the nuclear space, I mean, do the French start going out and looking for a mine to buy? I don't know. As to where that is. I think, again, everyone is very focused on the conversion side of things at the moment. They're also focused then on the enrichment. I mean, you heard Dr. Huff say recently that at the London Fuel Conference that the bottleneck that they see is conversion. So I think you're more likely to see something in the lines of like acquiring a uranium mine when we get to that stage of fixing the problem, whatever the problem is, it determines it to be. But right now, it's getting OECD reactors off of Western enrichment demand. Um, so at this point, it's conversion. Does Honeywell Converdyne? Does Honeywell put Converdyne up for sale? I don't know. So far, the answer to that question is no. I mean, they're putting money into that. I'm sure they'd like to. I mean, it depends on everything's for sale for the price, of course, but I don't see any further acquisitions really at this time, because this one was just so out of left field. So I didn't see it coming. So take that with a grain of salt.
Got it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, one other thought on this, and this is just a soapbox I get on here and there. I have no idea how this will play out, but maybe just like as a counterbalance, because I think there are a lot of people that are making very big investments in this space under the idea that because we need way more uranium in the future, at some point these majors are going to have to pay a pretty penny for their uranium or uranium. I maybe not. Like one thing that I like to look back to is just the last gold bull market where these companies is, hey, like the price of gold is going crazy. So what all these gold companies do, they went out and they spent a ton of money on exploration. They just went just on a binge. They were just buying their competitors at any price. They were going snapping up juniors because gold was going up, and they thought that's what their shareholders want. Eventually, the price of gold went down, got down value.
Austin, I think you're pumping it or falling in and out. Sorry. Am I losing you? Is everybody
These
else?
companies like Bear
Maybe.
on their anyways, long story short, these gold companies' valuations just got decimated. I think that executives for these companies will look at their Cameco is not a gold, and there is the part of this where Goldman Sachs got stock for the gravity, right? But I would say that you think about this from a perspective like, does Cameco really care if the world has enough uranium? They care about their returns, right? It's like I don't know if you see as Cameco stock get punished on this news. I'm not saying these acquisitions won't happen, but I would look at whether these juniors are going to get the valuations that you want with some healthy skepticism because they don't have to bring all of this online. It's not their problem. Their prerogative is getting returns to shareholders, whether we like it or not. So I'll just look at just like past resource bull markets of the past. A lot of companies that have went on M&A sprees have just been burned, and these uranium executives, they're very aware of this, and a lot of the investors from the copper and gold bull markets of the past are the same people investing big money in uranium. So I would just be conservative on the valuation you put on a junior if you don't think they can go into production. But Cameco is going to, because somebody, all the cards, opinion.
Okay, I think I got most of that, right? Yeah, I would agree. This is a, I think Mark, you touched on this a little bit earlier, how sort of out of character this was Cameco being a little bit excited, I guess, or I don't know, I'm not quite the adjective you used to describe it, but this is, I think, the first time in recent memory that I'm aware of that Cameco has gone out and they have actually issued shares to make an acquisition in probably, I mean, man, this would be a while. Going back and I'm looking at just normal course of business. I mean, this is just, it's a while since they've done something like this. So I think, I have, I believe that, Cameco, they are still going to operate in a fairly conservative fashion. I don't think we're going to see reckless M&A here. We are certainly not going to see them buying Denison or Arrow or all the other things that everyone was like getting excited about that I just said, no, that's not happening. If they wanted to buy Arrow, they would have done it 3 years ago. If they wanted to buy Denison, they would have done it 3 years ago. They don't care about these companies. I mean, seriously, Cameco is Cameco. They have the best tier one assets in the world, and they don't need to go buy some, other silly little mine. What they are focusing on is, of course, the fuel cycle, and that's what they're doing here. So.
It's obviously hard for me to see Cameco saying, "I know what we want to do. We want to sell a ton of reactors." But that's why I gave that long rambling note about did Westinghouse learn its lessons? Did the nuclear industry learn its lessons? What happens with that massive deal that supposedly got agreed upon for Westinghouse to build or to sell reactors to Ukraine? I don't know what to make of that kind of crazy plan. What's much more realistic and much more serious is the Westinghouse proposal to build in Poland. I'm not sure what this means for that. So I will have more opinions on that, I'm sure, in the coming weeks.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. That I don't know what's happening with those Ukrainian reactors. I mean, who knows what will happen there? But yeah, I think yeah, I the Polish.
Sorry, let
people
me give a little note. I
Please,
realized that we should have brought up what are Westinghouse projects around the world in nuclear reactors, and what do they mean? So one of the most serious efforts is in Poland, where Westinghouse has been working with the U.S. government to put a pitch on the table for the last few years, and Poland has taken that very seriously. There's a ton of swarming players in Poland. It would clearly make sense for the Poles to consider like a Korean offer, but right. So Westinghouse is in talks to, I think it's something like 6 AP1000s that Poland would want over the next decade and a half. Another project that's been in development hell is Westinghouse and India. Hard to see that that one's ever going to happen. India has their own indigenous program, and they are buying cheap, well, relatively cheap, relatively reliably built reactors of similar power output from Russia down in South India, Kundankulam. So and they've been in talks forever with the French over getting several EPR 1650 megawatt reactors that would make the biggest nuclear plant in the world. These are projects that have, like I said, have been in development hell. It's hard to see that being really a serious project that Westinghouse, as owned by Cameco, would pursue. But who knows? Never say never, I guess. Then finally, Westinghouse was involved in several other areas as pitching. I think they've probably been part of discussions in Czechia. They were involved in discussions and spent probably, I don't know, hundreds of millions, $1 billion, getting their reactor licensed in the UK for construction in the UK in the future, as the UK hasn't made a super strong definitive step forward after the pair of EPRs they plan to build at Sizewell C. Perhaps that is something that's in play. But in all these cases, obviously there's a history of Westinghouse getting brutally burned with their own obligations and as being terrible project managers. And it's not clear whether that means Westinghouse is never going to do that again, or they're going to get back at it and do it right this time, either because they have better management culture coming in from Cameco, or because they learned their lessons in Georgia and China, or both.
So I guess the other question there is, do we see a resurrected AP600? Something as maybe a competitor to the BWRX 300 here. Because
Okay, well, it's been, just to give a little bit of background there, I hate it when reactors are sold as evolutions of other designs that never got built. It smells like danger to me. Now, I've held my nose and gotten over it in the case of the BWRX 300, the 300 megawatt boiling water reactor that is a downsizing of the never built ESBWR, extremely safe or evolutionarily sophisticated, or whatever the hell the acronym's supposed to mean at this point. The ESBWR was a 1,500 megawatt boiling water reactor design from General Electric. Let me step back one more step. A boiling water reactor is like a big tea kettle. The uranium fuel rods are there, surrounded by water, and the water is boiled right there in the reactor pressure vessel. This big reactor pressure vessel has fuel rods, and it's boiling water, almost like, I don't know, almost makes it look in diagrams like a popcorn maker, where the C's are in the bottom, the popcorn pops up the top. In this case, the water is at the bottom, steam comes out the top, goes through a steam turbine. In a so-called pressurized water reactor, the type invented by Westinghouse back in the late 40s, early 50s, the water stays liquid all the way through the core. It is extremely bad if you produce any steam in the core. That is extremely bad. You never want to do that. And the reactor pressure vessel and the so-called primary loop, the piping directly attached to the pressure vessel, that is kept at extremely high pressure, double the pressure of the boiling water reactors, and at approximately the same temperature, to produce this very hot liquid water that then goes into steam generators, which are coiled tubes where the very, very hot pressurized water is on one side, and water that is at lower pressure and allowed to boil is on the other side. Then that steam goes into turbines. So PWRs are, you might think of it as a simpler core, more complicated and finicky rest of the system, whereas boiling water reactors are a more complicated core and vessel, but simplified in the rest of the system. So General Electric sized up its advanced boiling water reactor, which was built in 4 years flat in Japan. It sized it up and greatly altered the design into the ESBWR, extremely safe boiling water reactor. That was never built. Then they've shrunken that into their new BWRX 300 design that Canada has chosen to launch their enriched fuel age, shall we say, to launch their SMR program.
It is
Now,
modular. It is modular.
That means
that's a joke.
I mean,
that's a joke. I'm serious.
well, okay. Can I say this? What I've been told by experts in the field is the first truly modular nuclear plant was the ABWR builds that got built in under 4 years from first basemat concrete to commercial operation. 3 years, 36 months to build ABWRs for turning on the core and going critical. 4 years to enter full commercial operation. That was a modular construction project. When people say modular, they use all sorts of crazy, sometimes irrelevant meanings, like NewScale saying that they are modular because they have modules. Yeah, that is an abuse of the word modular. They have to earn the right to be called modular in terms of like the reason ABWR was built in 36 months, because the construction project itself was done extremely well with so-called modular construction techniques. AP1000. This is the PWR design promoted by Westinghouse. As Chapman noted, it is an upscaling of the 600 megawatt design called AP600 that was never built. There are some ugly and uncomfortable truths about the AP1000 because it is an upscaling. For one, they kept the same diameter of the containment as the AP600, just made it bigger vertically. They increased the height. I have been inside the containment of an AP1000. I have found it cramped and uncomfortable compared to my journey inside other containments. It's just it's a tight and uncomfortable space to work, and some of the parts that are key to the reactor's operation are extremely hard to access and replace. The claim is, oh, we don't need to access and replace them because they're going to work perfectly. That disturbs me as an engineer. We will see whether that promise is delivered in the earlier AP1000 starts over in China at Sanmin and Haiye, but we'll see. Early on, there was issues with one of the pumps at one of the Chinese reactors, and they had to shut it down and repair it, and it was evidently a pain in the ass. This is secondhand information that I'm giving you, but that's what I heard. So AP600 was designed back when nothing was happening really in the U.S. in nuclear, back in the 90s. The AP600 was designed. The combustion engineering System 80 that was built and operated in Arizona at Palo Verde, that was thrown out. And then when ABB, that's one of the other world light water reactor builders, Swiss, and I believe both Switzerland and Sweden had ABB reactors created. That was also bought by Westinghouse back in the day and integrated, and I don't think much remains from that business either. This was the time period that the AP600 was designed and licensed with the NRC, then never built, and then the AP1000 as a upscaled model of it was created. Like I said, I'm more comfortable with downscaled models than upscaled, but yes, I do know of at least one case in which Westinghouse officials have suggested building AP600 for an emerging nuclear country, but doesn't feel super likely at the moment.
By emerging nuclear country, you mean the United States. I mean,
Absolutely
that's
not.
also a joke.
No. Okay,
You
got
really,
it.
you
But
actually
yeah,
don't see that. You don't see you don't see an AP6 a use case in the United States for a reactor of that size. Do you think we will continue trying to build these gigawatt scale
well, Chapman,
reactors
think
if we
about
do
it.
so?
It's almost the same size, weight, everything as an AP1000, just 40% less power. The reason why it was proposed for one of these emerging nuclear nations is because of some concern about grid size limitations. As in the maximum allowable biggest turbine to be on a grid with a little bit less stable and smaller installed capacity of power generators.
So basically, if you're going to build an AP1000, if you're going to build let's just call it APX reactor in the United States, you might as well just go with the 1000 because it's effectively the same in terms of.
Hey, Chapman, the Chinese have upscaled it to 1400.
Do they still do? Are they still able to do that with two steam generators? Because that was the one thing I was thinking about when I looked at the design of the AP1000. Well, I have you here. I can ask you this question because that seemed to be the problem that San Onofre ran into. Right? They had those two steam generators, and it was just like it just wasn't able to handle it. All the power that was being pushed through them, right? Is that?
That's not quite right. The
Okay,
steam
thank you.
generators, it was more that the steam generators were novel enough, as in they were redesigned by Mitsubishi just for San Onofre, a nuclear generating station, a combustion engineering plant in Southern California. The steam generators would have eventually worked. The problem that I've heard from experts I trust is that the Japanese manufactured them with overly tight tolerances, which allowed unintentional harmonics to set up, that is vibrations from the device being, let's say, too in tune with itself. And if you just have slightly worse workmanship or slightly lower standards, or you just make allowances for how good you are at precision manufacturing, you can eliminate those harmonics that led to the abrasions, that led to a little bit of primary water with a tiny bit of radiation, tritium, leaking over to the secondary water. Anyway, all that was fixable. Californians at the time used it as an excuse to kill the plant and as leverage over the utility. It wasn't actually a non-fixable problem. It was just California leadership. It's very, very difficult to fix California leadership, quite easy to fix nuclear plants in comparison. So moving backwards, the question is, how many steam generators in the CAP 1400? And I am just confirming for myself, so I feel good here. Just a moment, I have the stats pulled up, and I'm going to confirm it. Geez, next time I'll make sure I have engineers familiar with Chinese nuclear here.
Jeez.
I want to say it's 2, but I will confirm. Yes, it's 2. Okay, I should have just winged it. It's a Twitter space, right?
Yeah,
anyway,
well, yeah, it's not recorded either. Well, it is on YouTube, but never mind.
It's 2 steam generators and 2 coolant pumps per steam generator.
Okay.
Wait, you're not recording this? So all these
No, I am recording it. Actually, it's on YouTube.
awkward
though.
pauses and
Don't worry.
oh, YouTube. Okay, nobody goes on YouTube. That should
Yeah,
be
there
fine.
you go. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I started. We started to do a live stream to YouTube just to have the record of it, and it was just easier for people to get to the individual recordings for whatever the spaces was that week, and if they wanted to go back and take a look at them. So, because we do talk about some very interesting and relevant things in here, and we sometimes have people like yourself who come and really add some really good insights into the discussion.
So Chapman, 2 things. I probably should go after, say, 1 or 2 more questions here, but I've sent you a link to a pretty decent open access paper on the general design and technology innovations of CAP 1400. Any nuclear energy nerds are gonna, I think, have a fun time looking over this this paper and the diagrams. One of the weirdest stories in nuclear, and I ran across some folks from the Chinese nuclear engineering space when I was in the Philippines recently, and I asked them the same question. China has two CAP 1400s under construction physically. They've been under construction for years. They look like they're almost done. They have not been announced officially as under construction to the world. As in, the IAEA does not have them listed as under construction, even though in Google satellite imagery, Google Earth imagery, you can see they're almost completed. I think that's going to be one of the most awkward paperwork correction problems we're going to see, where somebody's going to have to say what the official start date actually was for this project. There was a history of Chinese nuclear plants getting under construction almost speculatively by smaller groups in the central government in the hopes that the central government would then approve them. There's a lot of so-called ghost plants dotted around the Chinese interior where plant sites started under construction. You can even see big parts sitting around, and then the plants were canceled or never approved. So CIP 1400s were at one of the reactor zoo sites where at Shidawan, where the Chinese are also working with their high temperature gas cooled reactor. But we'll see if these things get officially announced soon, or if I've recently missed it. These CIP 1400s are Chinese IP upscaled, 40% power upscaled versions of the AP1000. It may be less than 40% AP1000s or something like, what, 1100 megawatts net, not 1,000. So if the
I think
CIP
it's
1400
1150 or something like that. I think so.
Well, it'll depend on the specific implementation at each plant. But yeah, okay, so Chapman, I've sent you that, and you can either post it to the group or not if you want people to see the CIP 1400 paper. The second thing is there's a gentleman in the uranium investing space based in Denver who's running a bake fundraiser, a bake sale, if you will, with very tasty candy. He sent me a sample, so I'm a shill for Big Toffee now, for Mothers for Nuclear. And I sent you a link to that, and I know that the mothers appreciate anything going their way as they look to consolidate their win saving Diablo Canyon nuclear plant, and as they look to help save other nuclear plants around the world with us.
Yeah, Kaiser, I actually am in a chat with him. So I will definitely post Kaiser's link to the Mothers for Nuclear for the Nest, into the Nest, and I will try to figure out how to get the, the paper that on the on the Chinese reactor. I'll tweet that and I'll be able to put that in the Nest too. So, but yes, do we have like any other questions for Mark? I have one that's probably out of left field, but yeah. Okay, we got someone coming up. I love nuclear. Did you have a question, or if you speak now, go ahead. I know you requested to speak, so come on. Where are you?
Oh, can you hear me, Chapman?
Yes.
Sorry about that. I was connecting there. Yeah, I actually do have a question. So, what limits the size of the upsizing? Like, what is the actual preventative method that limits you from like you were talking about the AP1000 going to 1400? What is actually limiting it from going up to a 2000? Like, is that the generators? What is that limiting factor? Is it materials themselves?
Size of the core and regulatory approval. I'll say that, and then somebody else.
I mean, I'm not sure what you meant quite by core, but that's, if anything, one of the least limiting factors, I would say. And other factors, so we have some examples in front of us. The EPR 1750 megawatt electric reactor is the nuclear energy world's equivalent to that double-decker Airbus that now has fallen out of style. I'm not saying that the EPR won't be built in the future or that big reactors won't get to be that large, but it has some interesting issues in common, I think, with that big Airbus, in that it becomes a huge project, a huge thing to order, and the complexity of the construction is enough that if you're not really good at construction, it's just this massive, colossal burden to get finished. Here's one of the limitations in any pressurized water reactor plant, or maybe light water plant. You have to make your containment strong enough to now, post 9/11, withstand outside impacts while also withstanding the full release of all the heat and the steam and pressure inside a reactor pressure vessel if it all comes out immediately. So your container has to be strong enough to contain a ton of energy, a ton of steam, ton of hot air, and a malfunctioning reactor. And that gets more difficult as the heat generation of the reactor system gets larger. There's more to contain, and it gets progressively more difficult to contain it with structural steel and concrete while also protecting the system from the outside. So that is one of the practical limitations. We do have some people that would almost certainly be much more skilled to answer this specific question. And so if that remains a topic of interest, Carl Novatar, nope, he's gone now. Briefly, we were joined by somebody who would have been a magnificent person to answer that question. But I think that's probably good enough for you for now. The size of the construction projects and the need to contain the entirety of the contents of the primary loop, depressurized, of water flashing into steam and water vapor inside the reactor pressure vessel over a long period of time.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Yep. Yeah. Sorry. And to go with what you were saying there, Chapman. Yeah, I totally understand that it's the size as well. But yeah, it was market economics and kind of the structural integrity portion that I was looking for. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, I mean, one of the biggest issues with like a size of the core really comes down to, or not the size, sorry, the size of the generation comes down to, is the planning for how much generation you think you need. Like, these things are decided like 10, 15 years ahead of time. And sometimes what does get these projects canceled, unfortunately, does to, short lack of foresight. Like, for instance, when we were up at when I was up in Toronto, I was listening to the SVP from Constellation, and she was talking about a project in Texas for a nuclear plant that got canceled because of cheap natural gas at the time, 10 years ago. Well, had they had the foresight and well, a bit of the, I don't know, balls, I guess, to keep on with it and realize that yes, fossil fuels are not going to be cheap forever. Had that plant, which would probably be coming online now, or very least we'd hope it'd be online now, would probably be wiping the floor. So just because natural gas has gotten a bit more expensive, obviously. So, there are things like that, but I think that's maybe where you get some of the SMRs that are coming into place. Like, it's just a bit easier to get your foot in the door with a 300 megawatt reactor than it is with a 1,000 or 1 gigawatt vert. So, I mean, that's the way I see it, but yeah.
Okay, Chapman, let's have your question, and then I should probably head out. Anybody with a question, just send it to me by DM, and I'll get back to you when I can.
Okay, so the big issue that I ran into, or the big thing that I saw in Canada, in Toronto, in terms of the future, let's say, of nuclear, comes down to these advanced materials and the fact that essentially, let's just say material sciences has perhaps advanced a bit in the last 30 years, right? And there's a huge gap now in irradiation data. And there's limits to how many neutrons that we have, and also like money, basically. You're talking about all these newer players that are trying to break into the scene here. and they're using, let's just say, advanced manufacturing techniques, and the way that you end up actually making, let's just say, that steel tube, which is the source of all civilization, is essentially just a series of steel tubes, and how you make that steel tube determines the metallurgical composition and structure of that steel tube. So now you actually have to have the process itself being certified by the regulator. And this just seems to be a problem that I think you have a lot of these very aggressive timelines, and I don't think they're going to be met by some of these newer entrants, be it NewScale, be it whoever, because they are working with these advanced techniques. The NRC is the French have their own way of how they want to regulate these things, and they require physical testing. You talk to them about a computer simulation, and they look at you like you're a crazy person. Whereas the British are okay with computer simulations for figuring out some probabilistic assessment of radiation data. How much of a problem is this, basically, and what can be done to help solve it? Like, do we just need to all write our senators and congressmen and just tell them, like, we need money, and your hopes of of a nuclear renaissance are just not going to happen unless we get this irradiation data and we get some sort of cooperation, I guess. I don't know.
So
That's a lot to throw at you at
what
once.
do you
I'm sorry. So go on.
what do you mean by irradiation data?
So, for instance,
mean-
yeah. So
Go
there seems to be like in these new, let's just say, materials that could be potentially going into reactors or processes that we're going to make these reactors out of. One of the areas that seems to be a common occurrence was the gaps in irradiation data. Like,
Got it.
yeah.
So I think I can fill in some parts of this question and then hopefully answer it briefly. The U.S. is very short on available time and space in test reactors. This slows a lot of things down, makes it to where questions have to be answered through very laborious, long processes with the NRC instead of just plunging things into a test reactor, bombarding it with years worth of neutrons in very rapid time periods. Yeah, this is an issue. The folks that I've worked with as Clean Core Thorium Energy need to do irradiating data for their new fuel that they've made. They're very close to the front of the line in the test reactor at INL, but at Idaho National Laboratory. But it has been a long time waiting for that reactor to come back from renovation. There isn't much of an alternative. The Navy gets first rights to use it. It is an issue for the United States that we weren't able to secure money in a timely fashion for the second important test reactor facility that we really need to get going. So the two main test reactors that the industry is hoping to rely on is I think it's the ATF, the Advanced Test Facility, and the VT, the Versatile Test Reactor, VTR. So ATR and VTR. Yeah, it is a major oversight that America has let these capabilities drop. I think it will matter. I think it will matter less than the fact that we're bad at construction. We're just not very good at construction. So that having those test reactors ready to roll is not going to help us manage a work site and pour concrete better. It's not going to help us do wiring better. It's not going to help us, recruit workforces better. It's very specific bottlenecks that are not my main concern, even though they're important enough that they should be addressed and hopefully will be now that there's almost total bipartisan cooperation on the Hill for nuclear energy issues. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah. I mean, it helps to answer your question the way that you see, but totally. Yeah, it does. We need more test reactors, but at the same time,
that's not the same thing as being able to construct.
Yes, exactly.
Even completed designs.
Yeah.
It's about accelerating licensing and maybe making slightly better design decisions. But even then, what does it mean to make a better design decision when we have so little experience constructing power plants?
Well, that does it for my question. Thank you very much. Last call on anyone? I know, Mark, before I can just say, before I totally let you go, anybody up on the dais? Raise your hand now. Okay. Eric, okay, sorry.
I'm late to the call, and maybe this was already brought up, but I was just kind of curious. What was the motive? What do you think the motivation for Westinghouse selling out was?
Its owners didn't want to keep it,
Yeah.
or at least didn't want to own it the way it was owned.
Yeah.
Westinghouse's opinion on the matter, it's not clear how important that is.
But I guess I'll add on to that. You don't see a potential brain drain problem. Like, do you think, have anything that you've heard there that you may be willing to share? Do you feel like people are going to be leaving the company?
Brain drain.
Yeah.
Brain drain to where?
Yeah. GE, Framatome, I don't know. Who knows? But yeah.
There are very few places to go, and I mean, so there's some infamous threads on Twitter. I'll see if I can find it and send it to you later, Chapman.
Okay.
Where people talked about the breakdown of culture at Westinghouse during the disastrous periods of the AP1000 adventures.
Yes.
I think that people will come back to a Westinghouse-led well. They will not leave a Westinghouse-led well. They will continue to leave a Westinghouse not led well. Will Cameco lead Westinghouse well? I think they probably have as good a shot as anybody. I went into that in some detail, the cultural reasons why I think that this should. I think it would. I think it will work if it's going to work with anyone. But yeah, it remains to be seen. Westinghouse has already had some amount of brain drain because they've been unsuccessful at bold new projects that were supposed to change the world. People will return for that W logo that Westinghouse doesn't even own, that it rents, but still, people will return to Westinghouse. It is still the most storied single name in nuclear. If Westinghouse is doing well, if nuclear is doing well, there should always have a place for Westinghouse. Whether Westinghouse will be the leader of new nuclear, yet to be seen, but they make great fuel, and they're going to keep doing that under Cameco.
Well, thank you so much. Mark, this was very unexpected. We didn't talk about this beforehand, everyone, so Mark just kind of showed up. You are welcome here anytime. Anytime I'm holding a space, please stop by again. This has been really great, and I'm sure everyone here has... I've enjoyed you being here. I'm sure everybody else has very much enjoyed you being here as well. So... Okay, and with that, I think we just lost Mark. I don't know. He's had a disconnection. I don't know if he had to really had to go. So other thoughts, like, or where are we at, folks?
Well, Chapman, I just did not anticipate that press release hitting this afternoon. That was from left field, or a shocker for me. So I haven't even begun to process it in terms of what does it do for the landscape? What were the Cameco's big motivations? I'm sure we're going to get some information shortly from Cameco, but it was. I thought they were looking to gain size by either buying another miner or just buying a ton of physical. They they were raising capital to take out Westinghouse.
Yeah, and I don't know if this 650 million, which can be upwards of 747 million apparently according to the deal, as to how much of that is a part of that 1.5. I guess it would be actually a part of that 1.5. So, like I said, they still have to raise another. They may have to do another one of those prospecti because they may have to have another prospectus. No, that would be prospect. No, that's not plural. Another prospectus here because, as according to what the numbers that I've done on a napkin here, sheet of paper, of course, is 1.55 to 1.45 billion that they're still going to have to raise here to cover their part of this deal. I'm very interested in there are parts that I am interested in, and that is that they were okay with having 49%, but then again, they're also okay with having 49% of GLE through Silex. Interestingly enough, in that Silex deal, of course, there is the option that they have to increase that stake to 75. Now, is that a part of this deal? Do they have the option to increase their stake? Maybe, maybe not. But yeah, that one was interesting to me in that part of that deal. So I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm
From
trying to find
large
their
money
tweet.
asset
I'm trying to find their tweet here so that I can post it up in the nest so everybody can take a look at it.
from large money or big asset managers, Brookfield, this deal, nothing's even close to it from, a dollar figure. Do we even know like who's in second place or third place in terms of maybe some big buyer that's been in SPUT or anything else like that within the last couple of years? Because is this the beginning that shows some other heavy hitters that maybe we should be getting serious about nuclear from a financial standpoint? Or, I just don't know, if there's guys, big operators in there that are in the hundreds of millions of dollars that have already invested in the space that, are not readily known about.
Well, I'm going to have maybe a bit of an opinion here, and that is that in terms of nuclear in the OECD, there's Framatome, Orano, there's Cameco, and then there's everybody else who doesn't matter. I mean, I'm just to be honest. So this move, as far as Cameco making a large acquisition, how much does that matter for NXC, Denison, even the Boss or Paladins of the world? Probably not a lot. I think this was a move that is purposeful exactly to Cameco. It is directly related to Cameco. It is a part of their long-term strategy that to become vertically integrated. So in terms of what other people in the nuclear space or within the uranium space that are maybe looking to expand out into the nuclear space, what they're going to do, I don't know. I mean, this was so out of left field that I would just, it's hard for me to even think I knew Westinghouse was for sale. I didn't know who was going to buy them. This, in some ways, when I think about it more, it's like, okay, this makes sense. I mean, this is, it is, I think Cameco sees the future in the services. They know that we're going to become far more efficient with the uranium. And, 40 years from now, fast reactors are just around the corner. And uranium mining is going to be completely irrelevant at that point. So, they have to they have to basically expand out their business if they want to, maintain the going concern. So, and I think this is part of that. You're always going to have fuel fabrication. You're always going to have enrichment of some kind, I'm sure. But yeah, that's my take on it. I think I wouldn't. I would be very cautious to read anything else into this. Like I wouldn't go. There isn't anything speculative investment wise here to make.
No,
Not that I
well,
can see
let's
of.
talk about big groups like Guggenheim or other large asset managers that would come in and take notice of Brookfield jumping into the space.
Oh, I see what you mean. Okay. Okay, now that you put it that way, there's always a possibility that, someone that doesn't really know the space does come in and they start putting down way more money than they need to for something, or it's just sort of reckless. But man, in this environment though, I don't know. That's what do you think? I mean, do you see these large speculative asset purchases at this point? Like within the near term, let's say?
I don't know. I don't know what's there to buy for some of these guys. The only thing that I can think of is that they take either, kind of like an Eric Sprott did with gold, where there were silver companies where he just shows up and takes 10 or 20% of a company because they need the financing, or someone shows up in Sput and just starts buying in huge blocks and, winds up helping Sput buy 5 or 10 million pounds at a time of uranium.
I think everyone is like, I don't know. There has been, for the past couple months, as I have been in this space, I have sort of felt like there's been a bit too much attention up until basically Silex became a thing. There was just too much attention that was placed on U308, and yeah, it's going to be needed, but we can get more of it. In the grand scheme of things, with the Russian bifurcation of the world supply chain, what becomes far more important is enrichment and fuel fabrication and conversion. For the time being, anyway. I mean, you have to have those things in place before you can even really start to think about the physical. I mean,
Well, maybe that's where the money flows first. You might start to see a couple big asset managers come in and say, okay, we see where the pinch point is. This is where we're going to invest.
yeah, I mean, it could be, it could just be very much that simple. And it's far easier to get into. I mean, the easiest area probably to break into that space would be the conversion space, but just how much conversion capacity is needed but then again, Converdyne's coming back online. I don't know, geez. I don't know how these people think. Someone help me out here. I think we have Austin coming back up here. And Mark sent me a message and said he dropped out. Joker, go, Sandra, you can talk. We don't have hands here. Hi, how have you been?
I'm well, thanks. Yeah, good. Hope everyone else is well. Yeah, I just, if you just in regard to that question, there's a very good interview by Smith Weekly, just came out today with Dustin Garrow, and answers a lot of those questions concerning overfeeding, capacity for both conversion and enrichment. So I'd really recommend you listen to that because, Dustin's a go-to man if you want to really know what's happening. The lie of the land when it comes to, the fuel cycle. So, just do a search for Smith Weekly and he posted it this morning. That's all I have to say.
Was that posted on Twitter or what was the space?
On Twitter.
Yeah, okay.
On Twitter, yeah.
Could you
If you
post
just do a search for
that?
Smith Weekly.
Smith Weekly? As in like Adam Smith
Yeah,
Weekly? Okay.
Andrew Weekly. Andrew Weekly's, that's his, investment sort of handle.
Okay. Was anything in
I
there?
can send it to you if you like.
Yeah, that'd be great. I would like to see that.
We'll do that. I'll send you a direct message. Okay, just give me 5. Anyway, that's all I needed to say.
Sure. Well, let's see here. We have the ASX open while we wait for that. Whitehaven is back to, is up 4% today. New Hope is up over 4% today. Coronado's up over 7% today. Silex is down a little bit. They're down about 4%. Where Silex is in this place now, it's sort of interesting because Cameco has now spent a whole bunch of money on Westinghouse, and that I think makes an interesting question as to the financing of global laser enrichment. So that's interesting. Now, maybe that's because they haven't quite got the buy-in yet from utilities, and they've decided to move forward with this side of things, and they're going to continue onwards with. It's an interesting acquisition. It really is, in that maybe they see fuel fabrication for the time being to be something better to put their money into. And I don't know, but it's like you just spent you're spending 2.2 billion here for Westinghouse, right? And now you're going to turn around and you're going to spend that money again for global laser enrichment, like within a year potentially. That's that's a lot. That's a very for a very conservative Cameco. That's I don't know. I have a hard time seeing that. Um, So maybe that gives us some clues as to where everybody's thinking uh, in terms of what the Russian enrichment is. Like maybe for the time being, we're still going to have enrichment flowing out of Russia. That could be the case. But having fuel fabrication, well, that's where that enriched uranium goes to, and it's deconverted at the fabricator, and you know Cameco will then have revenue from that. So, oh man, but it's interesting. I mean, I don't know. I'm just trying to. I'm gonna have to think about that, and I'm sure over the next couple of days, I'm gonna have conversations with some people, and we'll have something interesting. But yeah, I'd say this is very very interesting for the nuclear space. It's very very interesting for the uranium space as well. This is a just a left field acquisition, probably for the best. As you know, I think this is where Westinghouse needs to be. I think, and I think this is good for Cameco. I this Cameco has been the company that I've said to everyone, if you're invested in the uranium space and once get set for a long term portfolio, at the very least, Cameco needs to be 25% of that. So just simply because, you know, they seem to be so priming themselves to be the leaders of this space that are actually going to have real cash flows and are going to form, the less speculative base of any portfolio. So, Lucky Lemur, you're up. What's going on? You up in the speaker
No,
space?
I didn't want to really waste Mark's time, but I thought maybe I should say about when he mentioned the modeling, because it's not just modeling for the accidents or incidents, right? I think we still have a issue with understanding what the safe levels of radiation are for humans and the distance from the plant or such leak of radiation. And I think the public still needs to be educated and told the truth, about the safety of such radiation leak. And we should be modeling for that as well. But I think we first have to agree on the numbers.
Yeah, I agree. I do think that, there needs to be a fairly serious and actually honest debate about that within the regulatory framework. I mean, we've tried in the past, recent past, like within the last couple of years, to get the NRC to look again at, the way that they do measure safe radiation, moving beyond a fairly unscientific and just sort of something that we've just stuck with for 70 years called linear no threshold, and moving to something that's actually a bit more in line with the data that as we have come to know it for basically just 70 years of working with uranium and radioactivity as a species. So I agree. I think more honesty there, and I think more better modeling is important. So. But as far as the ASX goes, generally everything is slightly up to down. Deep Yellow is down. Lotus is flat. Energy Resources is up 1%. Yay. Somehow, some way. How is that company still around? I don't know. Alligator is up just under 2%. Boss is up over 1%. Peninsula is down, 3.1%. Paladin is down 2.3, and Bannerman is down 4.4. These are the what I call the ASXU companies that are over 100 million in market cap. So everybody else is either mid or small caps. So yeah, but interesting day. So
Yeah, Chapman, I just sent you that link via direct message for the Smith Weekly interview with Dustin Garrow. So you can post it up on the Nest if you can. But I really recommend people listen to that because he alludes to a lot of things pretty much contrary to what everyone's been talking about. The fact that overfeeding isn't happening at the moment. There basically isn't enough natural UF6 to do overfeeding. Both Urenco and Orano have stated. And I actually read an article in Energy Intelligence a couple of weeks ago, and they interviewed both. They interviewed the Orano, one of the reps from Orano, and he basically stated that they're not overfeeding, and to their knowledge, Urenco wasn't overfeeding either because there just isn't enough UF6 to do that. And
this surprises me not in the slightest at all. Jeez.
Yeah, there was some really good tidbits of information there. Basically, it talked about the Russian enrichment. Some of the utilities have contracted for Russian enrichment way out to 2030, and because of the uncertainty that surrounds them actually getting that enrichment, whether it's via Russia cutting it off or sanctions being imposed down the line. So the utilities aren't actually even covering the uranium needs for that enrichment that they've contracted for, because they're just not sure whether they're going to get it. And they're also doing it because they're hoping that the uranium price comes down in the meantime. So they're playing a pretty dicey game. So there's some really good tidbits of information, and Dustin's always got his ears to the ground when he's out and about, talking at conferences, etc. So I really recommend people listen to that.
Yeah, I think
appreciate it. Oh, go ahead, Chapman.
No,
go ahead.
I'm gonna be listening to that. That sounds very interesting, for certain. So go ahead, Derek.
I appreciate the information there. But do you know if the underfeeding is completely stopped? We might not be overfeeding, but is the underfeeding ground to a halt?
Oh, I don't know. Well, that's their MO at the moment. That's all they can do, because of the limited UF6 available. Until Convidine gets back online, there really is a bottleneck with UF6.
So this is
So
I think this is actually sorry, but this does illuminate what Dr. Huff was saying back in London a couple weeks ago, where they were saying, and this is why we need more damn transparency. Can they please just tell us what the hell is going on? But it is very illuminative to what she said, which is that the conversion is the bottleneck right now.
Exactly. Yeah.
So what you're saying is because there's not enough conversion, you can't do overfeeding, and because you can't do overfeeding, they're still underfeeding because they don't have enough stuff to pump through the system.
Well, they're underfeeding.
Exactly.
By underfeeding, basically what that means is they're re-enriching tails, essentially.
Yeah, so if they don't, but what I'm saying is if they're not pumping enough through there, then it just depends on what they're at capacity or what level. But if they got some idle time, they would be underfeeding, right?
Correct. I mean, they would be taking what they have. I mean, they have tails, right, that they can put back into the system, and they can re-enrich those tails, for certain. But it does seem to be that they don't have any new material to put into that system, to put into the machine, as I like to say. And that's probably that could explain why there has, for whatever reason, just been an absolute just ground to a halt in the spot price, right? Because nobody's buying, because there's been nothing to buy, because it doesn't matter if you buy it, you can't convert it. So it's it's illuminative there as well. I think we can start to connect some dots, I think, from this information. So this is good.
Is there any information when ConverDyn goes back online aside from 2023?
2023, I don't know. That's the best I can give you, unfortunately. I know it's like, other than 2023, yeah, well, it's 2023. It's we know that Cameco's earnings are coming out on the 27th, that they might have a bit more information there as far as their conversion, and we can maybe from there, talk about, get some information on maybe what we think is happening at ConverDyn. But I don't know, email Honeywell, actually. That might be the best way to go about it.
But again, I think about a fuel buyer. If I know it's just 2023, and that's 1 year is a very short time for the way that people think in the nuclear space, why wouldn't you be trying to front one that, get the U308, make sure you're the first in line, or you've already be talking to ConverDyn? You don't have to wait for the doors to open the first day to be able to strike a deal with them.
I mean, I'm sure the deals are being discussed right now, and that's probably what is preventing the restart, right? Is they're still working out a price, and they're going to basically going to extract as high as prices they can get, right? So because they've been shut down and they're not going to restart for something that doesn't generate a return. They have put money into ConverDyn and basically refurbishing that facility. So I would imagine those negotiations are probably happening. I mean, that would be a guess, but I would imagine they're probably happening right now.
So it sounds like the way the market's structured right now, that the first catalyst would actually be ANU entering in the market. If they enter the true market and buying from traders, they might be buying their stuff directly from Kazatomprom, and you don't really see it, but it's like,
or from an existing warehouse.
I was looking at, like, when Cameco was doing the raise, not knowing Westinghouse was what they were chasing, that they might be buying pounds because there's been issues out there with Inkai and things like that, and then and being able to ship uranium around. And then I thought, well, maybe Cameco will compete with ANU, and then because you'd start to get the price action, SPUT would come alive. But it's kind of different now. We're waiting for ANU, and ANU might re-energize investors in SPUT if they just start seeing the uranium price moving. You look for the underlying price to move. People have a particular thought process or bias about it, and then that can become a self-reinforcing process, a boom-bust deal. But it sounds like now we just got to wait for ANU to start hitting the market before that movement would happen. Or, you might get a one-off reactor or two that says we need some U308 right now, but we have the, ability to get it converted and enriched.
I mean, go on, sorry.
No, Dustin just said there's a lot of moving parts at the moment. It's very hard to sort of wrap your head around exactly what's going on because of so many variables, so many moving parts. So I just think I think who was it? Art Hyde and Adam Rodman just had an interview. It's behind a paywall, so I just saw a tidbit of it. But basically, he talks about the forward curve, and it's just adding to the tightness of how that forward curve is just going to move up, in a more steeper fashion later on. The longer they delay things, it's just going to create a much steeper price increase later on. But again, even Dustin Garrow said, look, a lot of moving parts, very hard to wrap your head around exactly how this is going to play out. And I've just sent you, Chappie, I just sent you the link to that intelligence report article. So you can put that up on the Nest too. That's really good reading in that too.
All right, we'll do that as well. And I'm
Hey,
liking
guys,
all of these tweets, by the way. So if people need to go back and try to get this later, they can either go and look at Sandra's profile, Joker64 here, or go to mine, and they can also find these links to this information here. As always, it's important to do your own due diligence, so please look at these things.
what ticker is this? Westinghouse. So Cameco is buying them. They just announced
They
it.
were private. Westinghouse was private at this point. Yeah.
Oh,
So it wasn't a ticker, actually. But the ticker for Cameco is CCJ, as you probably know. But yeah, I'm sorry.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, it seems interesting to like merge ARB. So, but if it's a private deal, it's kind of hard to get access.
I will say that Cameco did close extended hours trading at 2310. I don't know if that was just kind of a last minute buy or what. I haven't looked at the volumes at that price, but I will say that I did get it at 2250. That was just my buy target, and I'm sticking to it. I have buy targets for everything, folks, that I want to buy, and I'm buying them at those prices. And those are the prices that I'm comfortable holding them at. I will weather a reasonable market downturn at those prices as well. Cameco going back to 15, I might have to reevaluate there, but yeah, we'll see. So, or just buy more. I don't know. Maybe I'll have to end up doing that dollar cost averaging thing. So, but
Wait, I just noticed, why did it go down after hours?
because they were selling shares to Goldman and some other investor bank or investment bank at 21.95 per share. They raised about 600, and they're going to raise about anywhere from 650 million to 747 million in shares at that price. And obviously, investors were not very happy about that. Considering it was trading at 25 today. So
I think they just take advantage when the market's going down, and then they do this like just to kind of like excuse it. So I guess though, if you buy under their price, though, it's probably a decent price.
Well, I mean, look at it this way. Goldman is willing to come in, and they're willing to buy Cameco shares at 21.95. This is Goldman
If you
Sachs,
get it at
folks.
18 then, or like at 16, it's like really, really good then.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. So, but this is Goldman can get a return for, of Goldman standard. And look, people like, I sometimes make jokes like, if somebody comes up with a grand investment theory or they think they've figured it all out, why don't they have a job at Goldman? And these are the smartest people on the street. So if they're willing to come in and they're willing to buy Cameco at 21.95, I'm a buyer at 22.50. So that just reinforces my price target there. So I know that some people are thinking like, oh yeah, this might send them down lower. Maybe. I don't know. I think this is a fairly substantial buy here in a very, very bearish market. And I think that does reinforce the value that many of us see in Cameco. Yeah, it may go down. It may go down. We may go down and we may see $17, $15 Cameco again. But I am very confident that we're all going to see, at this price, a good return. Because Goldman has to make returns. Investors have to make returns. And we'll see. If anybody has any words against that, please say now. We need some counterpoints. So,
well, here's a quick question: how many investors are in Cameco that go, now they're getting into this reactor build space? There's a lot of overhead costs with that. Maybe I want to be invested in more of a pure play miner. Like, what do you think that their shareholder base might have that opinion?
I think that would be a very dumb idea because you'd be giving up on two of the best tier 1 assets in the OECD. I mean, you want to be in a pure play miner, fine. But guess what? Cameco is going to be taking money from you. So you have to be, in my opinion, you have to be investing in Cameco because look, they're going to have converters. Yeah, you've got other converters. Yes, you have other fuel fabricators. Yes, you have other choices of enrichment. But this does increase the odds that, your mine that you're investing in is going to be doing business with Cameco. And I don't know. I think it's I think I think it's better to be with the mine that has actual cash flow. Now, everybody can make their own investment decisions, obviously. And I think there are some people that feel a bit more comfortable in just pure play mines. But Cameco is a mining company at its heart. I don't think they have bought Westinghouse to build AP1000s. They have very, very clearly bought Westinghouse to close a gap in their vertical integration strategy, which is light water fuel manufacture for PWR reactors. So hope everybody could hear me there. I was standing back a little bit away from the mic. So, but yeah, how else? I guess we can. Is there any generalities about the market that we want to talk about? Anything that we've kind of noticed? It's been a very, very, very interesting 2 weeks here. I was in Toronto last week and I was kind of out of the market a little bit, and just sort of watching from the sidelines, and it just seemed like it's. I don't know. Today was a bit more interesting. I'll be first to admit we had a bit of a bounce in some of the uranium equities that I was not expecting to see actually. But then again, we also got a bit of a bounce in the market in general before the Bank of England spilt their tea and crumpets on everything. So, I see Austin, you've come up. What do you got to say?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm excited, scared, or both, but I think earnings season is going to be wild and not necessarily in the way that I think a lot of people think. I think we're going to get some of both. I think everybody says, oh man, earnings are just going to be terrible. I'm going to buy puts and I'm going to short all these things and I'm going to make a killing. I don't know. I mean, expectations are really low, and this has been the most telegraphed downturn of all time. Back it's like even in like March and April, we had all these tech companies that were doing layoffs, right? And people are starting to get worried about unemployment back then. It's like, oh, we have all these big name tech companies that are laying off companies and pulling back spending. Between that and just the absolute nonsense that you accountants and CPAs can pull off, Chapman, I don't know. I'm not saying it's going to be anything sustainable, but I think that you're going to see just shorts getting destroyed. You got to remember, I think it's something like 12 of the 14 biggest moves in the NASDAQ ever have came during bear markets. And for whatever reason, like 6 of them came in October. Like I'm talking like 1 day rallies of 7, 8, 12%. I think that we're going to see a 1 day NASDAQ move of over 5% this month or early November, because I think people are way too short, and I don't think that earnings are going to be as bad as people think. That's not to say I'm bullish or that things are going to get better from here, but I think people are going to get blown the hell up in earnings season, but to the upside, very temporarily.
I would agree. I think we've seen a lot of what they call theta burn in the market. Just a lot of sideways action, a lot of up and down, just burning away premium. Um, at least on for people that are trying to like if you're gonna get in on the downside, it's best to you really have to be strategic there if you want to have a good return or and in my case today have a lot of damn luck and I'm sending flowers to the I need to send a gift to the Bank of England. I mean, seriously, Jesus. Today was a very, very rare day for me. I think it's a rare day for any trader where you just, all of a sudden you're like looking and it's like, oh my God, what the hell just happened? I mean, I just remember it was, about what it started about 3 o'clock today or something just before that. I gotta go back to TradingView and take a look at when SPY started to crash, and yeah, just before 3 o'clock, and you're looking at it and it's like, oh god, it's going down. Oh god, it's keeping going down. And today wasn't even a big move. I mean, this was just a 2% intraday. You know, just imagine the Fed coming out with this kind of language that the Bank of England did and saying like, you're on your own. Like, holy shit. Just imagine what's going to happen on that day in the markets. So, I think I think you've got to be somewhat you got to be careful here with the longs, and I think you also have to be mindful with the shorts, because you never know when you're gonna feel that squeeze, and when you're just all of a sudden gonna have this rally out of nowhere, because it will happen, and that's there's yeah, I think that's the best way to put it. So, what do you think, Austin? You agreeing there? I guess.
I do agree with you, and I think just because we just all look at the index and think, oh, stocks haven't fallen that far relative to what's going on. I mean, that's both true and false. If you look at some of these individual names, just assuming a lot of people that are pulling shorts are like on individual names, right? Some people go into short the QQQ, whatever. But one thing, just like I was looking at it again today because I work with them just like in my line of work and kind of like digital advertising and data analytics. Like a company like Roku, they're down over 91% from their all-time high. This is a company that's has a market cap of like 6.5 billion, has 1.7 billion dollars cash. They have a legitimate business, and it's one of the companies of the future. Like when you look at just like where the advertising tracking is going and getting rid of cookies in iOS 14 and just getting off linear TV. A company like Roku's got a great future. When you have something that has $1.7 billion net cash, has a legitimate business, and is down 90%, I think there's a lot of people that are buying shorts on that, and just a moderate beat, just even on just like the cost side, that thing can go up 50% in a day. Like, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it's possible if you get a short squeeze in some of this shit. And I, I would not be short going into this earnings season. If any, I would rather be long than short. I know that's a bold statement, but I actually believe that. I would rather be long than short going into this. But of course, the better answer is cash. But if I had to choose, long.
Anyone buying ATVI?
What was that again? ATVI?
Yeah, it's a really good price if it's going to close.
What is that? I don't know.
Microsoft buying Activision.
Oh,
It's at
okay.
73 and closing at 94.
What an
I can see a rally in stocks except for my largest positions. That's usually the way it always works out. It's always my smallest position is the one that does the best.
Today was a
So
very it was a interesting day for me. I guess in that it was just one of those rare days. It was just like something that I got just like way too reckless on, and I should not have done it, but it paid off. So don't do what I did, seriously, which is buy puts on AMD. Because holy crap. God.
My advice is don't touch another option for at least a week. Let it cool down. Get off the hot streak. Every time I've ever gotten on a hot streak, it's ended poorly. So
Oh no, no.
don't roll the hot
I
hand.
I'm gonna enjoy some of the many thousands of dollars I got today. So, Jesus. Yeah, that's the best thing to do is to just to recognize that yeah, you got lucky, and sometimes it's just a gamble. And the best way to win at gambling is to not stay in the casino. So,
so I I definitely think that we're going to continue to see the occasional violent rally. I do think the trend is going to continue to go down. And I do think just because of the nature of sell side analysis and what the business is all about, that earnings estimates are going to be playing catch up with downward guidance. That doesn't mean that we won't have spectacular surprises to the upside that have maybe been overdone already, but I do think just because, underwriting is the name of the game. Research is really sort of marketing for that. That those numbers are a lot slower to go down until management has come out and said, "Hey, like here's where things are. It's the end of the world. Go ahead and write this down as much as you want." But it's hard for analysts to lead there. You don't want to be the guy that does that.
If I were to tell you guys Netflix or Tesla, which one would be going above 250 and which one's going under 200, and both can't go the same way, what would you pick?
Oh,
And Netflix
man.
is more volatile
Come
right now than
on.
Tesla.
Oh, really?
It's a hard one, eh? I think Netflix up. Like, I don't know.
That is not fair.
So make a pair trade out of shorting one and buying the other.
Yeah, they're both at like the same price, and Netflix is right now more volatile.
Damn it, man. You just had to come in and just, totally this. All right, I think. All right, I think Tesla is going under 200. Well, okay. Can they both go under 200? Can one bounce back up? Or do they both have to, one goes under 200 and stays there?
I prefer no, but I think Tesla will go I mean you probably buy it at 180 now,
Oh, I don't know
probably
when I'd buy Tesla. I think it's so. It's such
I'd
a.
rather buy Ford, Ford's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it's at a discount, but they've got a
feels
lot of
easier.
debt. That's the problem.
And you know what? What if in a few years they put the dividend back on, and you can kind of just accumulate and maybe sell some puts? It feels easier. Tesla feels scary. It's like Twitter.
Yeah. So I actually don't hate Netflix. I don't own it. I've never owned it. The advertising side of the business they're rolling out actually has a really, really strong future. I don't know if it moves the needle in 2023. No, trust me, Chapman.
I know.
I worked my career and I owned a marketing agency doing just connected TV ads. Netflix long term actually has a very, very good business ahead of them. I'm not saying I'd buy it here as necessarily cheap. It's very cheap relative to Tesla. And one thing to consider, I'm not saying this is going to happen again because the world's changed, but in the Great Financial Crisis, movie theater tickets actually went up into the worst of it. They were selling more tickets. They had more people going in because the reason is that was some of the cheapest entertainment out there. And even if things get bad, people will still want something for entertainment, right? What is a logical extension of that? People are going to subscribe to Netflix and other streaming. So I actually think that yeah, I know that Netflix and some of these streaming companies got hit early on in this downturn. I think their subscriptions will go up if we see a major recession because people will stop going out to eat. They'll stop doing all the other really fun stuff, and they'll pony up $15 for the Netflix subscription. So I don't own it because I think there's way better opportunities in uranium and so many other things out there. But I would have no problem buying Netflix and holding it if it dropped another 20%.
Well, also, if you're just comparing those two companies, wouldn't you want to have a recurring revenue model business as opposed to selling a car and hoping you get that customer back years later?
But what are you talking about? You have the I'm making a joke here, of course, but the self-driving features and all these other little subscriptions. You're not even going to own the car. You're going to have to pay rent on that car, even though you paid $80,000 for it. This is a joke, but yes.
And the physical risk on Tesla, and then all the other things have to go right. Netflix kind of feels safer, just software and.
Let me give you the ultimate short case for Tesla.
Monopoly.
I'll give you the ultimate short bull case, short bear case, whatever. Well, short as in short's going to pay money. Someone comes in with a better battery technology, and Tesla can't compete. What the fuck is Tesla at that point? It's a stupid company that has a shit battery.
I think if Ford could produce all those F-150s,
there's so much danger there. Well, I mean, yeah, and there's so much risk there for Tesla that someone is going to come in with a better battery and no one is going to want to buy Teslas. I mean, and the company's nothing at that point. I mean, seriously, it's way, way too expensive for that kind of risk at this point.
Yeah, but I'll say that, like, I do like the brand and the car. It is really expensive though too. It's got a lot of I guess there would be a price though that you'd probably buy it, but like it just.
Well,
I'd rather just buy Ford. It feels easier.
I've looked at these two, and I'll make my pronouncement. Uh, Netflix will stay above 200. Tesla will go below it. So there you go.
That's yeah. I feel like good thought. Yeah.
I'm not a Netflix fanboy or anything like that, but I think you can make the argument that Netflix is the one FANG stock that people have come to completely discredit and see as broken, that
That's what I agree
has
with too.
undergone a transformation that has fixed that. And I think as Fang got long in the tooth to really, sorry for the pun, people kind of added Microsoft and Tesla to that group, maybe Nvidia on the fringes of it. And I think Tesla is, if you look at those titans of the S&P 500 and S&P 100, that is maybe the last one to have people say, A, this is either too expensive, or B, this is broken and isn't going to work.
I think it's
And
Apple. I think Apple's the one that will actually go down.
Yeah, you know what, you're right. You're right.
But I would agree that both are actually. It depends on,
I just think Tesla's held up longer than Apple did. Apple
Sure.
started the decline sooner.
Yeah.
But I agree with you.
But it's only declined it hasn't declined much. I mean, Apple has a lot more, I think, a lot more way to go in
Yeah,
comparison to everybody else. I mean,
agree.
most companies, Amazon, Google, Netflix, all these, they've all made their moves down since the start of this, and Apple really hasn't yet.
Yeah.
So,
I think those are the last two right there.
Yeah. And you could
But you
see, well, and they hold each other up. Like, so if the NASDAQ, they both don't usually sell down. Like maybe Apple will sell down, and Tesla holds the NASDAQ up, or it's vice versa.
Right.
But when, because usually there's somebody on the NASDAQ that's the whipping boy for the day. And so I say it like the one thing it's like really selling down, and it actually in a crazy way it holds everything up because people are moving out of that and they're moving into something else, right? Because a lot of people, they don't sell and then just go to cash, right? I mean that only happens to me, and at the most inopportune times, of course. As you know, everyone, I have bought Cameco here, and naturally it's going to go to $25. I'm going to sell again and become a meme. So I'm just, saying that now. Okay, everyone out there, they know exactly what's going to happen. I don't care. They can say whatever the hell they want. I really don't give a shit. Okay, they can leave me out of their stupid little schoolyard antics. Do not care. You guys, find someone else that actually, responds. Because I don't. So, anyway. But that's that. Yeah, I think on the wider market, though, there has been there's got to be a cooling off period, because you had such a move up in oil and gas last week, right? I got Meg going up 20% in 4 days. No wonder, even though oil is high, no wonder it's not going anywhere. It's exhausted. You're gonna have to have people come in and just gonna give it a little break. And I don't know. I think I wouldn't be surprised if we see a bounce in Cameco tomorrow, because I think it might open at a price that people have been really waiting to see it at. It could also sell down, and I could be out some money. So, but we'll see. Along with all the other people that bought after hours. So but yeah, I mean, you saw some stuff yesterday. Just. Quite a few things are down. I mean, energy fuels was down. Just in general, it's the market hasn't really been completely climbing. Like, we got NewScale, they're under $11 now. I didn't really set a firm price target on NewScale, but sheesh. And that's probably going to keep me from buying it, but I don't know. I mean, again, that one could go right back up potentially, but you never know. I mean, it's hard to say. It's hard to really believe that you're gonna make easy money in this market. I mean, it's so I don't know.
If you had to, if Apple went to 125 and like the first time, would you buy it or not buy it? And then you wouldn't be able to buy it unless it went to 80 after.
Oh man, I would. Can I decide after third quarter earnings?
But that's what if it just yeah. But like that's what's so weird. Like it feels so hard to say no, and then it's like if it dropped, like what would happen if it actually dropped to 80? Like how much damage would that do to everything? Like would it feels like
What
I don't know. I was
you
thinking.
know, I made a lot of money on AMD today, and I made a lot of money on AMD, and that's just revenge for all the bullshit that AMD put me through earlier this year. Like, oh, I'm at $100, and I have all these analysts that says I'm going to go to 130 and maybe even 140. And oh, no, I'm
I just
not.
love stock for like 3 years, and then like it was like $20 or something a couple of years ago.
Yeah, and it's still. I mean, it's got solid revenue growth. It's good for the long haul. I think. I think this is the metric I have for everything on the market. If it's above 20 times earnings, no. You really need to get it below 20. If we're talking about something that's like not uranium, not nothing super speculative, or something that has like outsized returns. If you're talking about like blue chips, things that are just going to be around, Apple's not going anywhere, Netflix isn't going anywhere. I think buy targets on those have to be under 20 times earnings at least. Preferably as low as as you're willing to go there. But I think you just have to assume that everything is going to go and head that direction, no matter what they are. So
I think there are exceptions. I think if we get a one hell of a sell off, I would encourage everybody to go and just actually like read Amazon's quarterly reports if you've never done it, or their annual reports or whatever, and actually just like look at the breakup of a business like that. I would say that if Amazon falls back to say 90 or something like that, that's about the buy of a lifetime. And don't look at their PE. They have Amazon Web Services, which is, in my opinion, head and shoulders, except for maybe Microsoft's Azure, which is like the only thing in this league, the best business on the planet in what people think is a retail company. Like stuff like that. Like, I don't know. There are some things that you necessarily can't decide what's cheap and expensive based on the PE alone, because as soon as Amazon Web Services gets basically broken out of that company or spun out by the regulators, and it will, that that's one of the most valuable companies in the world. So keep that on your radar. I don't own it. Amazon was my biggest position for about a decade. I want to own it again, but man, something like Amazon Web Services,
you're
best company in the
practicing
world, in
you're
my
you're
opinion.
practicing bid discipline, Austin. You're waiting for the market to come to you, as I've told everyone to do in uranium. It works, folks.
Well, you just can't buy tech in this environment.
Oh
Like, that's
God,
what
no.
makes sense.
It's like Jesus, and even then, it's like I'm sitting here going like, man, AMD below $60. I like these prices, and then I'm just sort of sitting here going like, yeah, but this could go to like 35 really easily. So I don't know. You have to balance greed and you have to balance opportunity. And for me, like I said, I've said this before. I just set price targets, and I buy at those price targets.
100%. The best time to buy an undervalued asset is when you can. And when
Yeah.
something's super undervalued, you should buy some of it. JPOW be damned.
Yeah. So literally, you guys out there, if you're in cash, you're looking at the uranium space, talk with your friends about it, but set a price target and stick with the price target, and don't buy before the price target. You have to maintain a bid discipline strategy. Wait for the market to come to you, because it probably is. So
Chapman, do you ever write puts to realize those price targets?
I do not write puts. No. That's yeah. I know people that do. I know people that they sell covered calls on CCJ, and they make actually quite a bit on that. Um, but as far as like in getting into that, I haven't done that yet. No, so I don't know enough about options really
I
to.
was only curious because you have that price target discipline, so it makes it easy to say, this is what I'm willing to pay for it. So therefore, here's the strike price I'm willing to write when you consider the premium that you get.
Oh
And
yeah, yeah, and you almost like you end up buying what you want anyway, even if it continues to go down. I mean, and you got it for
right,
what
right,
yeah,
yep.
exactly. Um, yeah, I mean potentially that could be something I might explore. But I'm not confident enough in the options market. There are other people that I'm still learning about that from, and I'm getting more confident in it. But it's not something I'm quite willing to do just yet. So
Smart.
yeah, I mean this is the one thing that we had someone in here, Ben K. He said if you don't really know what you're doing in the options market, you're going to lose. So it's just one of those things that I'm treading a little bit lightly there. So but again, there are people that make a lot of money doing that. So anyway, how do we feel about ending it here? I mean, I think we've covered everything. There's no reason to go for on and on forever. Like I said, this is on my YouTube channel, Proven Reserves. You can just search Proven Reserves on YouTube. I think I might have a link to it on. I don't. I should add a link to the profile, but yeah, this is on YouTube if you want to watch this recording. Um, Again, there's also on YouTube there is a in the thumbnail somewhere along in the video. I think after like at least after the first 15 minutes of this, I hope there is a Cameco diagram from or a illustration from their presentation, investor presentation that they had out today that shows the fuel cycle, the nuclear fuel cycle, and I sort of have circled where this is in that fuel cycle, so you can see how this fills a gap for them on that road to being vertically integrated. But is there any closing thoughts?
Good luck, everyone.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly. Good luck, everyone, with your trading tomorrow. If you're in the market or not in the market, enjoy the view from the sidelines. Doesn't matter. Everyone can, it's all a learning experience. Even if you're not trading, you can just watch the action in the markets. Sometimes that's actually what I do. I literally just watch the action. I just kind of do a little bit of paper trading and think about some new ideas and see what how the market's reacting to those things. But as I said, I think this has been great. It's really great to have Mark here. That was totally not expected, and I'm really happy he came. I've been wanting to have him on Spaces for a while, and he's just such the expert in that area and is able to, I think, communicate these things much better than me. So it's really good that he was here again. You can catch that replay on YouTube. We'll definitely be here. I will be around in Spaces. I'm usually in the day trading Spaces every day now. I know it's so fun, but they're cool. And I'll probably be here next Tuesday once again. I'm sorry it's been about 2 weeks since we've had a Uranium Tuesday. I was in Toronto last week, of course, at the nuclear SMR conference. So we missed that, but we will be resuming these regularly on Tuesday once again. But if that's it, I think we'll close it out here. And thank you, Chaos is a Ladder. I think this is maybe the first time you've been, maybe? I don't know. I think so.
We talked a little bit last night.
Yeah. I think I try to recognize people's avatars or their little images, and they always change. But yes, I remember that now. So, but other than that, Austin, thank you. Thank Thanks everybody. Also, Sandro, for giving us all those great resources. Again, those are up on the Nest. I've also liked them on my profile, so you can go and see my likes. I think, pretty sure I've had that set up, so everybody can see that. If not, let me know. And we will talk again next Tuesday. Good night, everyone.
Good night. Take care.